we started off, Dave was born June 21st, 1974. And we already had one son at that time. Kirk was 2.5 years old. And David came along, and he wasn't quite reaching the same developmental milestones that his brother had, so I was getting a little bit concerned. And we had the luxury of having public health nurses come out to meet with parents who had just given birth to a child. And I asked the public health nurse, Dave was about 2 months old, and I asked her, Dave really isn't holding his head up. You know, what do you think about that? He really should be holding his head up a bit more by now. And she said to me, she said, all babies develop at different rates, and so he'll catch up. It's no big deal. So I thought, she's the professional. She knows what she's talking about. Although she didn't have any children. So here's this great, beautiful baby, 3 months old at the time, with his big brother, who was 2.5. And I just want to take you back to about when Dave was about 8 months old, 9 months old. Actually 7 months old, sorry. Now I'm getting old, I can't remember all the times, I have to write them down. Anyways, at 7 months old, Dave had been getting lots of eye infections and ear infections and chest infections, quite unlike his brother, who was very healthy. So I was at the doctor a lot, and I kept asking the doctor, wow, this is really different, you know? And so he decided to refer us to a very well-known pediatrician in Windsor. And so I took David there at 7 months old, all by myself, this beautiful little guy, and laid him on the examining table on his back, and the pediatrician said to me, put him on his tummy. So I did that, and as soon as I put him on his tummy, Dave's head popped up. And so, of course, the pediatrician said to me, what are you here for? And I said, because he's not holding his head up. And so the pediatrician went, he's holding his head up. So I said, that's not it. So when I hold Dave in my arms, and with one arm, which most moms do, his head is kind of lolling all around. And he proceeded to go over to Dave and put his hand on the top of Dave's head and push Dave's head down again, and Dave popped up. So he said, Dave, he's holding his head up. And I said, no, let me explain again. So I went through the whole scenario again. When I hold him with one arm, I have to hold the back of his head because he's lolling all over and arching his back and falling backwards. So the pediatrician went over and put his hand on Dave's head again and pushed it down. And as soon as he did, Dave popped it up and let out a yell. So I proceeded to go through the whole song and dance again. And he went over and did that again, pushed his head down, and with that, Dave started yelling, crying, screaming, and he's going, he's holding his head up. And I'm like, no. By this time, tears in my eyes because I'm all upset, Dave's all upset, and that was my very first experience of not being listened to by the professionals. So I'm sure a few other families have had that experience before. So with that, the pediatrician said to me, and remember Dave was 7 months old, not even holding his head up, let alone sitting up. He said, well, if he's not sitting up by 10 months old, come back. And I was a bit aghast at that, and so went back to our family doctor, and the family doctor said, well, maybe we'll get a second opinion. So with that, our family doctor referred us to London, Ontario, which is 2 hours drive from Windsor, where I live. And David was diagnosed at 9 months old, and these are the doctor's words. Remember, these are not my words. But the doctor said to us, my husband and I at the time, David is severely mentally retarded. Forget about him, just go on with the rest of your family. Put him in the institution. So we were definitely shocked, and my husband stood up immediately, said no way, and walked out of the room. And I was sitting there with this gorgeous baby in my arms, wondering what had just happened. Tears coming down my face, so I just meekly went out and left the room. And the two of us, I remember us sitting in the hallway on it. It was like a bleacher that they have at basketball games or volleyball games. Sitting out there very low and just kind of looking at each other and saying, whew, what just happened? We kind of guessed that Dave had a physical disability, but at the time we had no idea that he had a developmental disability as well. So we decided we're just going home. We're just going to go home and do whatever we do for David, the same as what we did for his brother Kirk. Then we decided maybe we needed a girl. So we adopted a girl. That seemed to be the simplest way at the time, although now at 33, it's not very simple. But that's another whole story. So Jessica came and joined our family at 2 months old, and it was on Dave's 5th birthday, so we had a christening and a birthday party at the same time. My husband was a great sailor and used to just take Dave and they would go sailing. And I always had visions of some headlines in the newspaper, you know, father drowns with disabled son. But sometimes, you know, I just closed my eyes and said, you know what, he's got to do what he's got to do. And some people call it the dignity of risk. I call it, he does whatever his brother does. So my husband would put the life jacket on him and climb up the pulpit of the boat and go into the cockpit, tie Dave to a winch, and they'd go out sailing. It's like, whew, scary. But they had a great time. Segregated up until about 10 years old. So at 10 years old, he was allowed to go into the Catholic school system. And we went to the Catholic school, the same one that his brother went to. And to kind of prepare for that meeting, I said, maybe we need to get the priest on our side. We're Catholic. So we went and talked to the priest and said, this is what we hope to do. Enroll Dave at the neighborhood school. And he said, oh, I know the kids in Hamilton, Ontario have been included in the Catholic school system. I'm supporting you all the way. So it was like, whew, somebody knew and was going to help us move forward. So it was really wonderful to know that he was there to help us. However, the principal was there and very welcoming. And Dave started attending in grade 5. That was the grade they chose. And you can see him there with all his classmates. And they did everything. He partook in all the activities, the fairs and the track meets and plays and everything that everyone else did. Dave audited the classes, so he wasn't doing the academics. Luckily, he had a great teacher, the same one that his brother had had, and she made him a computer program that he could make a snowman. What else do you make in Canada? And that was kind of a great thing. So she was quite willing to go the extra mile, so to speak, and set up something very individual for Dave. In 1992, Dave had a real challenge. He had very severe scoliosis, and both kinds. And so the doctors said, in order for Dave to have this scoliosis surgery, which meant putting a rod down his back, he needed to have a feeding tube placed. He had been aspirating food. He has had cerebral palsy as well. And so that was causing a lot of breathing problems and sicknesses and all those kinds of things. But Dave survived that surgery, and it was quite a remarkable thing. In fact, we had a big party when he was 18 to celebrate. But when he went back to school in the fall, he got the flu and got very, very sick and almost died then. But he came through and moved forward, and he went to the prom. So I'm pretty sure you have proms here too, right? Yeah. So it was quite wonderful. One of Dave's classmates invited him to the prom, and they all went together in a large group. And it ended up being a newspaper article on the front page. So this fellow that the doctor said put away ended up on the front page of the newspaper. So there's Dave. He got to graduate with everybody else. He didn't get the paper, the graduation diploma, but he did attend the ceremonies, and everyone just included Dave in high school. It was very, very wonderful and very welcoming. You can see he's in a communication class, so they did TV commercials and news stories and journalism things. This is one of my favorite quotes from Gandhi. Strength does not come from physical capacity, it comes from an indomitable will. And I certainly know that Dave proved to me his courage. And as I said, I knew I was going to get me at some points, but anyways, he was very courageous in a very quiet way. And so we had the vision, you know, for all our children to be independent of us. And I don't know why, but 25 years old sounded like a good age to me. And so that was the thought in my mind, that Dave might move into his own place. That didn't happen. As you heard in the DVD, I wasn't really listening to Dave. And in 2001, I had a second message. My husband had a very severe heart attack, and the parade of support workers that came into our home became a real stressor for my husband. So at that time, he was not supposed to be going upstairs. We had a 2-story house, and Dave's bedroom was at the front of the house. And so every time a support worker came into the house, he would like go and hide. And so I don't know what day it was post coming home from the hospital, but he decided he was going to go upstairs. And so I was at the bottom of the stairs. The worker had come in, and he was telling me, I'm going upstairs. And I'm like, no, the doctor said, don't go up the stairs. And he's going, I'm going upstairs. So there was this little battle going on at the bottom of the stairs. And that gave me the second message, you know, that parade of support workers in our home. Dave was 27 years old at the time, and it was time to help him achieve the same vision that his brother and sister did, to get his own place. And so that was when we started looking around for a place for Dave to move into. We thought about renting, but it just didn't seem quite feasible because Dave had a lot of physical disabilities as well, and you saw some of the equipment. He used a wheelchair to get around. He needed a lift. You'll see that. And so renovations to a rental unit just wasn't going to work. We looked at buying a condo instead, and that created the same problems, renovations. Dave's cousin lived down the street in a condo, and we seriously looked at that. But because you had to go to the planning committee, you had to draw up the plans, and then you had to get it all approved before you could even start anything. And so we thought, well, that's just going to be way too complicated. So we decided that we would take a look for a home for Dave. My initial thought was Dave should live next door, or he should be across the street, or kitty corner, really close. And luckily we found a place that was about 4 minutes away. So I was a little apprehensive about that, but I thought, well, maybe it'll be all right. So we found this place on a street called Riverdale, and just by our home, and we put a bid in on that place, and what happened was we didn't get it. Somebody else outbid us. Our buying realty is a little different than yours. So you put the bid in, and then the seller decides which bid they want to select. So I was very disappointed and thought, oh brother, I guess this is going to be a much longer haul than I thought. My husband, being 5 months post severe heart attack, thought I was crazy. But I really believed that Dave was giving that message to me, and I really hadn't been listening to him. He wanted to get into his own place. So we kept looking and found a place through an open house. They put ads in the paper, an open house. You can go look at the house ahead of time. So we went and looked at this home in Riverside, which was the area where my husband had grown up. And this house was just a bungalow, ground level, so Dave could get in and look around right away. So it was like, this is going to be great. So he got in, and we thought, this is the house. So we put a bid in on that house, and we didn't get that house either. So I was very disillusioned at this time, and thought, something just isn't right. So I decided to call the realtor who had helped us put in the bid. He happened to be also a parent of a son with disabilities. And he said, you must be really living right, because he said the other people's mortgage didn't go through. You got it. So Dave got his house, and this is the front of Dave's house, 992 Janice. And when we bought the house, it was all painted pink inside. Now, Dee would have loved it, but Dave did not love pink. So we not only proceeded to paint the whole house, which I would never want to do that again, that was a lot of work, but do some renovations, because David needed the overhead lift, and in order for him to get into the bedroom, which was going to work, the bedroom that was going to work best for him, my husband needed to put a hole through the wall and put a doorway right through the laundry room. So you can well imagine I was a bit apprehensive about him doing all this construction work, but it was something he wanted to do. And it was definitely a labor of love. So renovations were something that we took care of. And you can see that's Dave's bedroom. That's really where most of the adaptations had to be made. And so basically, Dave had this great big long 6-foot whirlpool tub. So my husband and my oldest son, who happened to be married and living in Hamilton at the time, he came down and helped Paul take that great big tub out of Dave's bedroom and move it over to his new house. And my husband was very handy, and he could reinstall the lift at Dave's place too. So that was kind of good. But we did involve all the family. My brother was really good at doing drafting, and so he drafted kind of a layout of what might work best for Dave in his bedroom. My sister was really good at decorating, so she helped choose colors for Dave. And my husband's family, there were 7 in his family, good Irish family, and so they all came and helped with the painting, and also things like my mom gave Dave she had a lot of extra dishes, so she gave him dishes. Another aunt gave him her secondhand couch, which was just fine, and a friend of mine gave Dave a lamp, and it was kind of impactful at the time. You know, I really didn't, a lamp, I thought, that's no big deal. But she really felt important that she was able to contribute to Dave living in the community. And whenever she drove by Dave's place, she happened to live in that neighborhood, she'd wave at Dave. So, it made people see Dave just as another homeowner. And this was part of the very helpful thing that we used to buy Dave a house. So it's called Home Buyer's Plan, and you have the link in there. And what you can do is, we as Canadians, my husband and I, were both allowed to withdraw $20,000 each out of our registered retirement savings plan, which I guess is your superannuation. And with that money, we could use that towards the purchase of a home for a person with a disability. So basically what that did, Dave's home was $100,000, which is, Windsor is definitely less expensive than Toronto or Melbourne. So we were able to buy Dave's house, And so that lowered the mortgage payments. And Dave's disability pension covered the rent and the utilities. As I said, we did the renovations, but basically his pension covered pretty well everything else. So that was an advantage of living in a smaller community. That home buyers plan, so you withdraw the money out of these retirement plans, but you have to pay it back over 15 years. But it just, you know, bookkeeping-wise, I'm not very good at this part, but so much money is paid back every year on your income tax. So it's really a wonderful way to lower the amount of money that you have to mortgage. Next door to Dave's home was the school, actually, that Paul went to when he was young. So it was a neighborhood that we knew as well. And the crazy thing about when Dave got the house, it was 7 minutes away from our home. And I was really kind of paranoid. I thought, oh my gosh, 7 minutes, that's really too long. I just don't know if we can manage that. What happens if there's an emergency? It all worked out just perfectly. 7 minutes is no big deal. And the other great thing was I couldn't pop in at the drop of a hat. So Dave had his own life, and you know, at 27 years old, every guy should be able to have his friends over and not have his mother around. The great thing about Dave living in his own place is it was his. Nobody could kick him out. And I like to tell the little story, and this one's a true one. A friend of mine outside of Windsor, and this is about at least 10 years ago, or maybe even 15 years ago, they decided they were going to buy a house and give it to the community living organization that their daughter could live in. And what happened was they did all that. They bought a house and donated it to the organization. And their daughter lived there. And after about a year and a half, she had some higher behavior needs, and the agency kicked her out. So they were a little upset, to say the least. So I always like to tell families that, you know, when you're buying that house, the great thing about it, or rent, oh, I love the breeze though, I'm okay with it, that it's yours and it's your family asset. So Dave rented the house from us, and no one could kick him out of that house. And it also gave him a bigger image in the community that he was a homeowner. And you know, it increases people's values, and that's the most important thing, is that everyone sees people with disabilities owning things and working and doing all the things that everybody else does. So there's Dave. That's one of the crazy times that Mom didn't see. It's a good thing I didn't see it. You're not supposed to put bubbles in the whirlpool tub. But they did, and as you can see, he thoroughly enjoyed it. So this is how we made it work. Originally, Dave had a housemate, and how it came about, Dave would get his wheelchair adjusted, usually annually, and so I was taking Dave over to the rehab center on the other side of town, and Dave's support worker, his personal assistant at the time, was with me, and we were driving along, and I was talking about Dave moving into his own place, and he said to me, he says, well, how are you going to do that? And I said, well, maybe we'll get a housemate, or, you know, we'll do some sleepovers. We'll just find a way. We were really good at adapting, as most families are. We just made it work. And so he said to me, he said, well, I'm really ready to move out of my family home. I'd be willing to move in with Dave. So it kind of fell on my lap. I'm like, oh my gosh, you know? So this fellow moved in with Dave and lived with Dave for the first year. He was in his own home, so that was 2002. And he was going to university in the daytime, but he also did a few personal assistant hours for Dave. So it worked out really well. As I mentioned in the DVD, we layered the support. So Dave had some individualized funding. He also had a bit of individualized funding from a community living organization, and he also had some Ministry of Health funding. And I know funding is always a huge barrier. I mean, we try to involve the community, but certainly for Dave, he needed that nursing support and that individualized support. But the overnight support was all given by this fellow in lieu of rent. So Dave had about 12, 13 hours of support a day. And usually how we made it work, the nurses came in the morning and did all Dave's medications and his feeding tube, and at one point he had to be catheterized, and he had COPD, so he had to have medications for his breathing stuff. So all those things the nurse took care of. And we were very fortunate. We had a wonderful organization in town, Community Living Windsor, and they were able to funnel the Ministry of Health dollars to provide that nursing support. So my husband and I became the employer of the nurses, and he funneled the money the same way Melba does for your individualized packages. So his organization did the payroll and all those kinds of things. As I said, he had some individualized funding, which at the time was called Special Services at Home, and that money allowed Dave to go out into the community 2 or 3 days a week, and that was sort of noon till about 6, and that provided him with his personal assistant to do his business. And then as we had another little bit of individualized funding that one of his assistants would be from 6 to 9 and help him get to bed. And sometimes they'd go out in the evening, you know, but it was just a 3-hour amount of time every night. So that's how we layered it. He didn't have total funding. So when there were gaps, and you know, you get to the stage where I couldn't lift Dave anymore, I couldn't even change him because it was just very difficult to, you know, roll him even from side to side. And so we would go, my husband or I, over to Dave's, as Paul said, and, you know, watch a movie or whatever, or we'd try to bring him back home so that we could do whatever we wanted to do, but he didn't always like that, as Paul said. He wanted to be in his own place, so it's like, okay, Dad, we're staying here. We're going to watch sports, whatever, hockey. Dave certainly changed a lot of the myths that people with disabilities do not have to live in group homes. And we were very fortunate when Dave moved into his home on Janice. One of the neighbors, as we're moving furniture, he came over and welcomed Dave to the neighborhood and gave Dave a bit of the history of the neighborhood. So it was really wonderful that he was able to be just seen as a new neighbor and a homeowner. So we didn't do any big presentations to the neighborhood or anything like that. Dave just moved in like everybody else. So there were always a lot of eyes watching, but we were very open and accessible to the people in the neighborhood. So we would explain about Dave just wanting to have a home of his own, just like everybody else. And all the neighbors agreed. So sometimes presence in the community is a very important role. In my book, there's a couple of stories that you might get a kick out of about what the neighbors said to other people who happened to be family members, and then the information came back to us. So it was really nice. And when those people found out whose David's grandmother was, they went, oh, that's okay. So once you put a face to that person and some relationships that they have, it really makes a huge difference to the neighbors, just like everybody else. So every year, Dave would have a Christmas open house, and it was quite wonderful. He would just do flyers with his personal assistants and go around, put them in all the mailboxes, and the neighbors all came at Christmas time for, you know, food and wine, whatever. And it got to the stage, so that invitation, I think, I always have to look, 2004. So by that time, the neighbors knew Dave was going to have an open house every year, and they started asking ahead of time, when is Dave's open house going to be, because we want to come. So it was really very powerful that the neighbors wanted to be involved in Dave's life. There were also garage sales on the street. So everybody, puts their stuff out, secondhand stuff. And so Dave would always be involved in the neighborhood garage sale. And that was a great way to get to know and meet the neighbors too. Dave's high school had a construction class, and Dave was actually in it when he went to high school. And we discovered after Dave was all done high school that they did community projects. So we went back to the high school and asked if they wanted to build Dave a deck. And they did. So it was really quite wonderful that at his alma mater helped him to get this wonderful deck that he could sit out and enjoy the summer weather. That's just a couple pictures of Dave's neighborhood. He was just down the street from a bus stop where he could go get the accessible bus, and a hockey arena at the head of the street, so Dave could go watch hockey games. It was great. He was in seventh heaven on that one. So Dave had a team of about 8 people, and it was quite wonderful because Dave was not only an entrepreneur, he was an employer of people. So he really gave back to the community because he employed people. And certainly our economies these days, I know our economy hasn't been too good, it's trying to come back. Employing people is a big deal. When I came to Australia in 2002, my husband and I spoke about Dave moving into his own place, and so we did a big meeting of all Dave's circle and friends and family, and did a map on what was going to happen while we were gone for 9 weeks. And I was very apprehensive, but it all worked out just great. Dave proved to me that he could do it. I could be really far away, and he could keep his personal assistants in line, but also, they were loyal to him. That was a really important thing, that Dave was their employer. The personal assistants were not employed by an agency, they were employed by Dave. And so I did the rosters, as you call it, the schedules. But the workers, if they wanted to switch a shift or a time when they were coming to support Dave, they called the other workers. They didn't call me. So they knew that if they couldn't come, somebody had to be there for Dave, and they worked it out with the other workers. So they were loyal to Dave. I believe what happened for Dave was we always got Dave's best personal assistants / support workers from the present ones. They had friends who might be interested. They could pass the word along. And the most important thing for us as a family, because Dave was very vulnerable and didn't communicate with words, that not only did we know the present support worker, but that support worker knew the next one, and it provided a safeguard. So somebody knows somebody that knows somebody, and it keeps all those important things for a vulnerable person in check, that we know those people. We used many different methods. We got a great support worker from putting an ad in a church bulletin. We also ended up bringing a fellow from the Philippines, and you saw Delphine there. We're able to do that in Canada, and I think there's something similar, although I haven't been able to sort of do enough research. Maybe some of the government people might be able to help you with that. So we were able to bring Delphine, who was a nurse in the Philippines, but when he came to Ontario, he wasn't able to work as a nurse. But he had the skills of a nurse. So that's what Dave really needed, somebody who had those skills. And not that I want to take advantage of anybody, but he was, we could pay him less than a registered nurse would make. So Dave's individualized funding went further. So that provided Dave with a lot of the nursing care that he needed. It is a challenge, and I worked in the Windsor-Essex Family Network, which is a support group for families who have kids, sons and daughters with disabilities. It's a little bit similar to Belonging Matters. And what we did was, because support workers are hard to find, we knew some nursing professors at the university, and we were able to do a project where families who wanted to be involved, and it was 8 families, and they were specifically recruited to be matched up with a third-year nursing student. And so that third-year nursing student did their clinical placement with one individual. So, for instance, Agnes in the DVD, who Dave loved, she was gorgeous, and he smiled every time she came in the door. She came to us via that project that we did. So she started, she did every week for 8 weeks, 8 hours of personal support along with Dave's present worker. And so the great thing about the university, us having those nursing students do their clinical placement with 8 different families, that at the end of that 8-week period, the families could hire that student as a personal support worker. So we hired Agnes as Dave's personal support worker, and she continued working for Dave for the last semester of that year, and then she worked for him in her 4th year of nursing, and then we were able to hire her as his nurse on our nursing support dollars. So sometimes, you know, we as families need to reach out to the community. And so the university was really wonderful about working with us on that project. And I actually heard about that project through a parent-to-parent conference in the USA in, I always have to think, Connecticut or Massachusetts. They have what's called Families as Faculty, and the medical school there puts med students into families' homes for a year. So it's something that your group could work on. You know, go talk to the universities that are training people who want to work with people who have support needs, and see if they might do a project. And out of that, certainly, you know, we said the only way we're going to do this is as long as we could offer a position to those students. Not everybody hired the student they had, and not every match was perfect, but certainly a lot of them did help families to find support workers. I just want to talk a little bit about microboards. We thought about setting up a microboard for Dave, which is really a formalized circle of support. We actually changed our mind after a while that it wasn't such a great idea, because it needed to be incorporated, and that meant board meetings and AGMs and reports and all that kind of stuff. However, I still like to use that term because it's a concept. So you can have a more formalized circle of support, and that circle of support, or microboard, whatever you want to call it, can take over the responsibilities that the families have taken on for our sons and daughters after we're gone. I mean, the reality is none of us are going to live forever, and our sons and daughters still will need that support. Certainly Dave needed that support. And so we brought together a group of people, and we made sure they were all younger than us. So they were all in their 30s, and one of the people was really, as she said, she was really honored to be asked to sit on Dave's circle. So I developed a list of tasks that I did. So doing the schedule was one task, and paying Dave's bills was another task. So that circle was going to take over those tasks that I did. So that we just made it work for Dave. You know, it didn't have to be formalized. The reason why we didn't formalize it, originally we thought that in British Columbia, individualized funding can be run through a microboard, but in Ontario we're not able to. So we thought we don't need all that if the government won't let us. So. So I know Dave always proved to us his significant abilities. He brought strength and his indomitable spirit to everything he challenged. Dave achieved the impossible, according to the doctors who diagnosed him many years ago. He lived a great everyday life. We dared to dream with Dave. He was very successful and achieved his dream. So I'd like to share my dreams for you. I hope that one day families will not feel so alone, so desperate and intimidated by this journey of parenthood. I hope for the day when families will be truly listened to. And I hope for the day when the birth of a child with different abilities will be celebrated, and when folks, no matter their disability, are seen as just that, folks. I hope for the day when families are connected immediately upon a diagnosis, and I hope for the day when families are supported with whatever it takes.